Chapter 27. The giant, elephant-like creature had gotten away. They saw the ion trail of its ship dispersing in the vacuum before they broke their own vessel out of its ellipse around the alien's world. Funny, the place didn't even have a name, at least not one Wilkes knew about. Not that he worried about it. There wasn't anything down there to worry about. So, the hard rain began to fall upon the alien's planet, courtesy of the Colonial Marines and delivered by Sergeant Wilkes. The chain-linked nukes seeded from the Benedict dropped from their computer-designed orbits and drizzled across the harsh land. Some fell into the sea, though the water harmed them not in the least. When the nukes chained and went off, they smashed at the planet, as might a raging god grown angry with his creation. Sheets of atomic fire scoured the surface, shockwaves pounded trees and bushes and even some mountains flat. Volcanoes, long dormant, were shaken to life by the explosions, adding their blasts and lava spews to the chaos. The land groaned and responded with earthquakes that shook the surface harder than any man-made scale could register. Oceans boiled, steam rose. Life in the sea, land and air cooked where it swam or walked or flew. The world rattled to its very roots, and whatever might have survived the initial devastation would fare poorly under the ensuing pall of the nuclear winter and radioactivity left by the deliberately dirty bombs. The aliens were hardy. They could survive in conditions that would kill most forms of life, but even they had to eat. Food was going to be scarce here for a long, long time. Wilkes watched on the monitors, the cans shielded by filters, as the alien's planet spasmed and died, and he felt real good about it too. He hoped they all lived long enough to starve, slowly. He didn't think he'd be bothered much anymore by the nightmares he had lived with for so many years. He had struck back against the hellish things, and his punch had been a lot bigger than any they could throw. He had destroyed them. The last laugh was his. Yeah, there was one left on Earth, but when he got back, he was going to see what he could do about that one too. He wondered what the penalty for blowing up a whole planet was. Why, he might be court-martialed. Imagine that. It was worse than Arona had figured. The first infestation seemed easy enough to deal with. His TAC teams were primed for sudden mass disappearances, and whenever an area started missing people, they went in. He mobilized transportation so that a fully equipped team could launch and parabola down to any spot on the globe in under 3 hours. The first nests were small, no more than 50 or 100 eggs, and a single queen. The TAC teams took no chances. They sterilized the area. The nests were raised, surrounding areas destroyed, suspected carriers picked up and detained. Those with implants were killed quickly, and their bodies burned. New Chicago, Lesser Miami, Havana, Madrid. Those nests were quickly discovered and eliminated. At first, Arona felt a certain smugness. True, there would be a lot of damages to cover and a certain amount of political heat to be endured, but the Planetary Security Act gave him a great deal of latitude. The things weren't very bright. They were like termites or ants or bees. They built their nests and set up egg chambers and sent workers out to gather food. The behavior was instinctive. There was no great intelligence behind it. It had apparently worked for these things on their homeworld, but there they didn't have such clever competition. For a time, Arona rested easier. He was the expert, and the military trusted him implicitly. Weeks went by. Months. More nests were kicked open. Paris, Moscow, Brisbane, Antarctic City. The things had spread far and wide, as he had feared, but still they were easy enough to find and destroy. The infection was bad, but controlled. Like a staph boil lanced and cleaned, it would heal. But then things began to change. The TAC teams were getting good at their jobs, practice making them better, and maybe they started to get sloppy. Or maybe it was some kind of forced natural selection. Like rats or roaches who have been hunted and poisoned or smashed flat, the aliens began to vary their nest making. The hives got smaller and more numerous. The TAC teams would find only 10 or 15 eggs in a tiny chamber, and such places were harder to locate. And there were more of them. An area of Greater North Africa in the old Ivory Coast yielded no fewer than 80 small nests inside a 50-kilometre circle. Some of the hives were in Abidjan, in the basements of skyscrapers or old warehouses, but some of them were in the surrounding countryside, under the ground. TAC squads discovered implanted cattle, horses, and even goats in some chambers. Anything large enough seemed to work. And while people in civilized countries who went missing were usually reported, a farmer and a few dozen cattle in some rural area might not be noticed. It was as though the aliens were becoming smarter as a survival characteristic. 6 months after the escape from the labs in Lima, Arona had to order a division-sized attack on a giant nest in Diego Suarez, on the northern tip of Madagascar. It was actually a series of several hundred smaller nests that had been tunnelled and joined together. 8 months into the war, Arona was responsible for the nuclear destruction of Jakarta. A year after the war began, the continent of Australia was considered too infested to allow any travel to or from, and a full quarantine was instigated. Any ship, air vessel or spacecraft trying to leave was shot down by Coast Guard laser satellites. It was no longer a matter of TAC units seeking alien hives to destroy. It was a matter of establishing perimeters and checking to make sure no carriers crossed into safe territories. It was truly war. Martial law was declared. All national boundaries were suspended. The military alliance came into being, and civil liberties were put aside for the duration of the conflict. Suspected carriers of alien embryos could be legally shot by the command of any military officer above the rank of colonel. Then it dropped to majors, and then captains, then sergeants. Pretty soon, any soldier with a gun could shoot anybody he damn well wanted to, and if the scan came up negative later, well, too fucking bad. War was hell, wasn't it? A few civilians here and there to save the planet? Yes. Alien drones that were captured, a rare event, seemed to have gotten a little brighter. The smartest could barely keep up with the average dog, insofar as intelligence was concerned. But the single queen captured in a battle that destroyed half of San Francisco's downtown district tested out to nearly 175 on the Irwin-Schlattler scale. That made it smarter than most of the humans ever born. The nightmares had come true. Whatever Arona had felt before was nothing compared to the sinking, twisting coldness in his gut when that little bit of information arrived in his computer. They were getting smarter. Too smart. And humans were responsible for it. On board the Benedict, the survivors of the trip prepared for hypersleep. Bueller lay in his rigged device, alive and stable, according to Blake. Billy had avoided him, but she couldn't get into her sleep chamber without a final confrontation. She had to speak to him. He was shrouded in a hyperbaric sleeve from the chest down to where the rest of him had been. From there up, he looked as he had looked before. He was awake when she entered the room. They were alone. Mitch? Billy, I would rather you didn't see me like this. Well, that's too goddamn bad. How else would you like me to see you? Like a man? I'm sorry, Billy. You can't know how sorry. What was I, Mitch? A glitch in your programming? She moved closer to him. She could have reached out and touched him. Could have. Would not. No, he said. Then what? I should have told you. I tried, but I just couldn't. I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. She laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound. I can't help what I am, Billy. I didn't have a choice in how I was born. Right, but you decided to fool the stupid human bitch, didn't you? No. Whatever I am, wherever I came from, I eat, I feel, I hurt, and I found out I love. Billy bit at her lip. She didn't want to hear this. She wanted to hear it more than anything. "I'm not like you," he continued. "I didn't have a mother and a father, never grew as a child, never had a life before I was created for the colonial marines. But I grow after a fashion, I learn. I became more than I was, and I experienced love. I don't know if it's the same as you feel. For me, it's a hollowness that only being around you fills, an ache when you are away, a fever that only you can cool. I feel lust for you, tenderness. I want to touch you, hold you, even now, when I'm only half alive." He stopped, sobbed. "Oh God, don't let him cry," she thought. She couldn't bear that. "And I deceived you," he said. "But when that thing grabbed me, when it tore me in two, that wasn't as painful as what I felt when I saw you look at me. Saw you look at me and hate me." He stopped, turned his face away. And Billy realised that what she had felt was real, whatever Mitch was. That she had loved him as he loved her. For what he described was what she had felt. What she still felt. "Mitch, go, Billy. Turn off the machines. Let me die." Now she did reach out and touch him. His bare shoulder was warm, the skin alive, the muscles solid. He loved her. She was convinced of that. Whatever else he might be, that counted for a lot. Nobody had loved her since her parents. "Mitch," she said. He turned to look up at her. She bent, kissed him softly on the lips, felt his pain and felt it ebb as he realised what she was doing. His arms came up, encircled her. "Oh God, Billy, shh. It's all right. It's all right. It doesn't matter." And it didn't matter. Not at all. It was war, and men were losing. Arona marvelled at this, that it should come to be this way. Man had the superior technology. It was man's world. Man had the advantages. Except that the aliens had a stronger drive to live. They would sacrifice all for that, for the survival of their species. Only a few rare men were willing to do that. A mother would die to protect her children. A saint would walk into the fire for his fellow men or his God. But the instinct of self-preservation was too strong in most humans. The aliens didn't care. If 100 drones had to die to save one egg, then they would. And did. The things sprang up everywhere, in places where a rat would have trouble living, in spots where no one would have guessed they could spawn, buried in the Arctic ice floes, in deserts, in the tamed jungles, on barges. Anywhere there was room for a nest. Nobody knew how many of the things there were. There were only guesses. The estimates ranged from hundreds of thousands to tens of millions. Private ships left Earth in droves, so many the military couldn't stop or even inspect them all. Most only fled as far as Luna or the Belt. Some could reach the far planets of the system. A few wealthy souls banded together and bought private starships before the government clamped down and made such ownership illegal. Thousands ran because on Earth there were few places left to hide. Arona was in one of those places, a heavily guarded military complex in Mexico. The perimeter was ringed with force fences, the ground mined, every car or air carrier that entered or left scanned, every passenger fluoro-viewed for parasites. It was as safe as anywhere left. In the end, Arona finally realised that the aliens were like a disease, not like an enemy army. The only way to save the patient was to cut off the cancerous parts and sterilise the wounds. And it was too late for that. It had metastasized, and the knife and radiation and drugs would not be enough. It had all happened so fast. A wildfire that started with a match and only moments later was a conflagration. Nobody could have predicted it would erupt so quickly. A year and a half ago, men were supreme on their homeworld, top of the food chain, the king predator. But now... The military minds were not brilliant, they never were, but those in charge were smart enough to know they were losing. All remaining starships were confiscated. Hastily laid plans began to be implemented. There would be a regrouping of key military personnel to the outer colonies, there to develop new plans for combating the aliens. Sitting in his information center, a cool and clean place of technological miracles of communication, Arona laughed. The Earth was being abandoned. He wouldn't be leaving with them. Oh, he could have gone, but what would be the point? He would survive, but he would have lost the most important battle of his life. There was an ancient custom that sailors had once observed. If a ship sank, the captain went down with it. The aliens had been his project, his work. Someone had spilled a retort of crucial fluid, and the lab had been contaminated. It was all his responsibility. He should have foreseen it. Even if everyone else forgot, he never would. He was going to stay here, win or lose. The hypersleep chambers stood ready. "See you in 9 months," Wilkes said to the others. The computer locked the ship into its return home. They would be going back faster than they had come. A few months. Wilkes hoped things had been kept clean with the alien specimen they had on Earth. They'd be careful, he hoped. And if it was only one of them, one couldn't cause too much trouble. The chambers closed on their patients, lulled them into a rest nearly to the borders of death itself, then held them there in a perfectly balanced stasis. By the time the first subspace messages of the horrors on Earth finally arrived in the flux of the ship's voyage, through the Einsteinian warp, the remaining few passengers of the Benedict were all hard asleep. The ship's computer recorded the cries from Earth, but the computer did not care.